And for you who have a European background, you might recognize this sound and this television screening. Oops, sorry. Let's see if we can get it running. Like so. How many recognize the picture and the audio? Yeah. So what kind of visions in your head do you get from this? What is the... Anyone? Is it Eurovision Song Contest, perhaps? Yes. Sports, perhaps? This is a picture for television, early 1950s. It's black and white, it's a still photo. If I would ask you, how was this photo created? Most of you would probably not know how this photo was designed as a means of putting it into television. It's 50 plus years old, and it's in another context than today. And when I show you how it was made, it's hard to grasp that that was actually the case of how it was done at that time. So this comes from this. And the reason we do not know and can't sort of figure out by ourselves how this works has to do with the fact that we actually don't know much about how you made television in the 1950s. So in the 1950s, we had a different knowledge horizon than we have today, and it's also a vocational knowledge horizon. Even if I work in television today, I would probably not know how this was carried out during that time. And it's an important sort of realization that the knowledge we contain within ourselves and in our close network, that is the sort of horizon of understanding new and novel things that happen around us. And if we do not have knowledge enough to grasp the new and the novel, well, we might judge that from a very different perspective than the one that might be relevant and applicable. And I'll give you another old example of this. This is a teacher in Sweden in 1868. Johan Stenqvist was a teacher in south of Sweden when the Swedish public school was about 26 years old. And Johan, he's actually my grandfather's great-great-grandfather. And the sort of most awesome educational technology that Johan had in his classroom was the chalkboard. This was state-of-the-art educational technology, 1868 in Sweden. And if you look towards this as being technology, well, obviously you can't store that much data. You have to erase very fast. It carries a little bit of weight. You can't take it home. So homework is not something from this educational time. It's hard to do long text, so you can only judge and evaluate short texts. The affordances of the technology limits the scope of what kind of education you can actually design and what is possible to conceive. Johan, he lived in Kvidinge, which is just next to another small place called Klippan. And in Klippan in 1868, they had just built a really nice paper mill. It was state-of-the-art, and they had been able to put down the cost so much on paper that it was actually possible to sell it, not only as books, but something you could write on yourself. Really amazing that you could do this in 1868. So he started iterating and exploring how paper could be something to use in Swedish public school. And after some time, he came up with the design of the blue writing book, which then became the common writing book of the Swedish educational system for nearly 100 years. And if you judge that as a technology, you can suddenly see that you can do a lot more things with this than you could with the chalkboard. You can write long texts. You use ink. You can store data in an old book and go back to it. There's all kinds of affordance. You can write long text, you can scribble, you can make drawings, things that with the chalkboard was totally inconceivable. But you can also imagine a headmaster in the south of Sweden at this time who has just invested heavily in chalkboards. All the teachers have a chalkboard each. They know exactly how to use it. They've had a competence development program in 2 days, understanding sort of the different symbols and how to use them in education, and everything is sort of really there. The sort of teachers know how to use this, and suddenly a seller comes over the door and says, hello, this is the new thing for education. It's going to revolutionize schools. It's going to be great. But I mean, if you have the concept, the knowledge horizon of chalkboards, your visions of what is possible to do with this is quite limited. It would probably be quite easy to tell this off as being hard. Students have never used ink before. We need new tables. Having homework, we've never done that before. It will never work. There's all kinds of things you might sort of realize when you're from this position going to this position. Today it feels a bit ludicrous, obviously, but we're in the same kind of shift today that we were during these times. And it's been going on since the 1970s. It's not a new thing, but it really changes the affordances of what is possible to do in education and in society at large. All of our kinds of interactions are suddenly mediated through new and novel kinds of technologies. And what is really different now than during the Industrial Revolution is that this mediation, the affordances of our technologies shift in a much, much faster pace than has previously been done. And that puts a new stress towards all our institutions, understanding sort of how do we grasp and understand education given this new position. And this is obviously nothing sort of special for government constructions, media, or education. It's something that sort of goes on throughout the whole of society. So I'll just give you a couple of examples, tying up sort of where we are today given this digitalization. And the first thing I'll talk about is data. Because up until just 20 or 30 years ago, data was physically bound by its medium, the paper, and you stored it in archives. But having data separated from its physical existence means that we suddenly have new and other kinds of data, and we can think towards data in new and novel ways that were just not possible before. And over the past years, it's become ever more important to understand data because suddenly we can use it in new ways that we didn't do before. So for example, in many countries we have discussions about surveillance and use of cameras for all kinds of things. And very often when we look towards regulation on this topic, the regulation we are discussing is how many cameras should you have? Where should you place them? Who should own the camera? It's very tied to the physical object, not to the data that is informed within the camera. Today, in a data-driven society, it's not that important how many cameras. It's much more important to understand who actually controls the information the system provides and what can that system do. It's really arbitrary to do these things today. I can do these kinds of things in my own lab with very low cost. It's also the case when we look towards data and public dialogue and public deliberation. When we look towards political debate and understanding political discussion with sort of a law and regulatory structure, looking towards free speech, right to the open and the free press, etc., most of our laws and regulations are designed about the concept of the physical room, that I can stand here and speak using free speech towards somebody else, bounded by laws and regulations that are from that country. But suddenly, when we have all kinds of platforms, Facebook being one, but obviously many different platforms, where our societal democratic dialogue is placed over, suddenly we actually shift the foundations of how that conversation exists. Suddenly we have another rule set, because it's not the Swedish law or the Lithuanian law that governs the context of what I write on Facebook. It's obviously Facebook who decides what happens on Facebook. It's a private company, and this is a private space. And I agree to be a part of that private space when I sign the agreement. Which means that they actually design what is the foundations and boundaries of what they figure is free and public speech. I have a friend who helps women with complexities in breastfeeding situations. And they have a very hard time sharing pictures on Facebook around information about breastfeeding, because that is not something that is within the boundaries of what is public and free speech according to Facebook, which is very different from, for example, Swedish law. So suddenly what happens when we have these mediated, technologically driven, open and public deliberations, well, the foundations and the sort of juridical structures surrounding that conversation actually shift. And that is a really, really big thing that's happened in a very short time, and where most nation states today have a hard time reasoning and reflecting upon what this really means for them. It's also the case when it comes to data and understanding how people actually engage and what happens when you can actually use data in all kinds of ways. This is an example from China, where they implemented a beta system called Open Credit System, where citizens actually get points in WeChat about sort of their daily habits of life. If you pay your taxes in time and you speak nice about Xi Jinping, etc., you get positive remarks. And if you go to jail or you can't pay your taxes, etc., then your points drop. And these points actually are regulated also in relationship to who you engage with and who you speak towards, etc. What happens in a public dialogue when you suddenly have these kinds of game-based point systems surrounding what it is to be a citizen in a country? And what happens when these kinds of authoritarian systems go on export? Really tricky situations. How do you see that? How do you see that in a public discourse? What does it mean? What does it mean when data in society drives discrimination? What does it mean in this case when most products in a data-driven society is produced by guys like me, sort of small, corpulent, fat, white guys from Western Europe? Well, in this case, what happens is that this faucet or soap dispenser, digital soap dispenser, it's only been tested on white guys. So what happens when you have a black hand trying to get soap? Well, you don't. But the white guy gets the soap. And this is not only the only racist soap dispenser, there's actually quite a number of them. And this has to do with how we design our open and free society, what products are there, how they are actually reproduced and produced within our societies. And if I want to give one argument for understanding sort of a more technologically driven world and how we create a more diverse and open pluralistic society, I mean, having women and a more diverse group studying and understanding this in a low age becomes really, really important. It's also the case of sort of who controls language and voice. This is a new Google example where you can ask your Google Calendar to make an appointment for a hairdresser. So I just put in that I want to I want to visit the hairdresser. Now this is super hypothetical because obviously I cut my own hair. But in this case, Google has made a system where you can actually just put in an appointment in your calendar that I want to go to the hairdresser next week, and my calendar will phone itself to the hairdresser and ask for the appointment. And this is how it sounds.
I'm looking for something on May 3rd. So give me 1 second.
That's the computer.
What time are you looking for around? At 12 p.m. We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15. Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.? Depending on what service she would like. What service is she looking for? Just a woman's haircut for now. Okay, we have it 10 o'clock. 10 a.m. is fine. Okay, what's her first name? The first name is Lisa. Okay, perfect. So I will see Lisa at 10 o'clock on May 3rd. Okay, great. Thanks, great. Have a great day. Bye.
So that is not something that is from a lab. That is actually deployed already in cities in and around the United States. What happens with the internet and our public dialogue when we suddenly engage and interact with these kinds of systems? How do we secure that information is actually true? Who sent it? Why? In what situation? Media and information literacy today has enormously much to do with data and the understanding of data and the understanding that our data-driven structures, just like Larry Lessig said in the late 90s, is a sort of reproduction of law. It's an ongoing thing having to do with sort of that law and regulation ties down with our data-driven structures. And this becomes important when it comes to sort of power shifts and power balances. When we have the top 5 countries of the companies of the Fortune 500 being technological companies where data is at the core of their business model. So understanding data for both countries, systems, individuals, educational institutions, etc., becomes extremely important. Understanding frequency. When do I measure? How much do I measure? When do I do that? Take the educational system, for example, where most countries gather around and exchange records on how good they are in PISA, which is a sort of very, very low frequency measurement of education compared to the data, a platform of education like Google Classroom or Microsoft's educational platform or Blackboard or whatever, the amount of data they have. Suddenly we have this pivot of data and knowledge going from nation state and the one who owns the building to the platforms and they who actually own, control and understand data with high frequency, high quality level of data and an understanding of it. So if we want to understand sort of next generations of media and information literacies, we need to really take a deep dive into understanding what drives this from a data perspective. We need to take into consideration ongoing advances in artificial intelligence. And we also need to think about how we think about these questions, because today it's the case that we have had this sort of open internet, open pluralistic internet. But over the past 7 or 8 or 10 years, we've gone from that position to an internet of platforms where we have the Facebooks and the Googles and other centralistic structures who have basically taken a hold on some niches of what it used to be on the open internet. But is that the sort of ending point? Well, if you listen to people like, for example, Tim Berners-Lee, who was the one who invented the World Wide Web, he actually went out just some weeks ago and said, well, I think we're doing this all wrong. This thing where we have these centralized platforms is sort of possibly not the end game. There's something else around the corner in the knowledge horizon that is one step further. And I think we should start thinking from a media and literacy, information literacy perspective also towards that horizon. And where we're going might be, and we do not know yet, obviously, because we're in the middle of such a transformation, is something you could call Internet 3.0, where you have distributed and decentralized applications that are not the Facebook and the Google, but where I control and own my own data, and I provide that to a service, and then it only can use my data during the time that I want it to, and then I get that data back. Where you have a larger control and where both information is decentralized and distributed. There's a bunch of different initiatives globally that I find really interesting at the moment. One is a Finnish initiative called mydata.org, which sort of drives these kinds of notions. Another one is the one that Tim Berners-Lee introduced 3 weeks ago called Solid, which is another kind of distributed and decentralized construction where you own your own data in a data pod, and you can, it's a different thing about thinking of the internet in and of itself. So what I wanted to do here in a very short amount of time is to just sort of take you through where media and information literacy was, where we have the conversations today in this very data-driven society where we're still catching up as nation states towards understanding where we are today, but where we also might want to sort of just look about the horizon and say, okay, so what comes next? It takes a long time to produce law and regulation and structures, and just looking towards the present might not be the where we find the real solutions for the future. So, given that we have a bit of shorter time, I think I'll stop there, and I'll just pose some questions that I find relevant and where I myself am in my works as a counsel at the moment. I'm interested in sort of what should be included in the framing of media and information literacy. I'm interested in how we mitigate risks to democracy given digitalization. How do we mitigate those things? But how can we also use technology to strengthen democracy? It's very easy to be negative and just look towards sort of the bad things, and then suddenly we look towards the good thing. But if we're a bit critical, both towards the negative and the positive, I think we can find a really interesting sweet spot. And I'm also interested in sort of the deliberative practices, because our digital society has an interesting aspect where affordances of our platforms, where we converse, changes how we deliberate, how we converse. And it might not be the case that the interests of the platform have the same affordance interests as a country has when it comes to the needs for a deliberation of democratic practices. And finding sort of new ways of doing that is really, really inspiring to me. So I think I'll stop there, and thank you so much for giving the pleasure of talking.
Thank you very much. We have time for one or maybe two very, very short questions. If there would be an urgent desire to compliment. Okay. Yes, there is one, please.
Media literacy and information.
So the question is if I'm working with platforms on these issues, and I would say the answer is yes and no. I haven't done a structured, being the council, I have not done that structured work. But what I have done in Sweden over the past 3 years is that I've ran a relatively large Facebook group around digital democratic practices with about 10,000 people. And in that context, I've had quite a lot of conversations with Facebook on sort of how a group design, for example, in Facebook limits and hinders some types of conversation but strengthens others. And how does the sort of interaction design affordances of platform actually model and shape the outcome of a democratic dialogue? So yes, in some sense I've done that, but I haven't done the sort of research aspects of it or so, but more to the practical side. That was a really nice question. So how do you empower parents? That's a really hard and tricky question. It's much easier to empower kids because they are in a structure which is designed to do just that. Parents is a more tricky situation, and the sort of way I would frame it from where I come in a Swedish context is that it seems, although we don't have, I looked at a Pew Research report just the other week, we could actually see that kids who have media and information literacy practices going on in school are much better equipped than their parents are. So when looking towards sort of large-scale work, it's really interesting to look towards that target group, like 25 plus. And there I think not perhaps perceiving them in the role of the parent, but addressing the same person from other roles and trajectories might be much more relevant in order to actually access them from workplace practices or other kinds of ways and means to find that same person, but not perhaps in the role of the parent from the school, but looking at other vectors where you can actually address those people in a way where dialogue would be more relevant and engaging from their own particular perspective, and where the parental aspects would be included. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlo, for wonderful intervention and the start of our session. Please have a seat. And I would like to continue our session and invite our speakers. The first speaker, Mr. Jude Abugu from Nigeria. Jude Abugu, please take the floor. Jude Abugu is a senior reporter from Nigerian Television Authority. The floor is yours, and mine is yours too. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My paper is entitled The Imperative of Media, Information and Digital Literacy in the Era of Internet-Driven Global Communication. For want of time, I'll be skipping some topics. Like we all know, the channels used in dissemination of information across international borders include the traditional mass media of radio, television, newspaper, magazine, and the new media, which is driven by the internet. We know that since the emergence of the internet through US military research in the 1960s, the internet has exploded with a lot of platforms, from Web 1.0 and its linearity of communication in 1989 to the interactive Web 2.0 in 2004, which now came with multiple platforms for communication, such as social networking sites, blogospheres, social media, and online news media. The enormous potentials that the internet offers and the realization that it can be put to a plethora of uses resulted in its application to various spheres of communication. Like we all know, the internet has shaped and continues to shape the way news and information are processed and disseminated globally. And this is why Alegu, Abuga, and Shedrack note that growth of technology, and in particular the emergence of social media sites like Facebook, Twitter, tampering with the original concept of and characteristics of mass communication, which initially entails an organization or news outlet sending information to people to just consume. But today, they just don't want to receive the information, they want to be able to contribute contents and opinion too. However, Friedman, who opined that the internet has played a crucial role in leveling the playing field across the globe by enabling people anywhere to have access to the same information to connect to and do business directly with each other. Also pointed out that the internet is a vehicle in which eBay and Arcada are like fellow travelers, which means we need media and information literacy, educational awareness globally. The internet, we know, is one of the channels of international communication, and it has helped people to interact and exchange ideas with each other, not minding their location. In that case, the internet has aided globalization by ensuring that people from different parts of the world can develop content, interact with each other, whether they are organizations, news agencies, or government at individual level. The internet has ensured that from different locations, people can exchange ideas. And I think the internet as a channel of international communications seems to have contributed more than any other technology in making the world become what famous Canadian scholar Marshall McLuhan heralded as global village in the 60s. There is nothing that happens in the world that is not felt in every other part of the country. For instance, during the 2016 US presidential election, the campaign was followed by Nigerians, even though it was happening in faraway America. That is what the internet is doing in an era of globalization. It helps in ensuring that development goes around the world. What is happening in Europe can be replicated or can be made available to people in Africa so that they can equally start to practice them in the area. However, despite the numerous contributions the internet has made to global peace, health, politics, economy, learning, security, and international development, due to its ability in making communication easier and faster and making the most of communication more diverse, global communication through the internet has some negative effects on global information consumers. The internet is used for promotion of terrorism, pornography, fraud, spread of hate messages, misinformation and disinformation, and other things that are inimical to human existence. In recent time, we know the internet has become a breeding spot for terrorism, as some terrorist groups recruit people through the internet. They propagate their ideologies and preach to people to join them through the internet. ISIS, Boko Haram, and other terrorist organizations, they are regular users of internet. They have social media accounts. They use the YouTube. They share their videos preaching to people to join them in their terrorist activities. Also, given the uncontrolled nature of social media, particularly can be potentially harmful in the event of misleading information from ignorant or malevolent users going viral through them. There are a lot of disinformation and misinformation going on in the social media circle globally, and this have led to panics, disorientation, misconceptions, and sometimes crises. For instance, in 2014, when Patrice Sawyer brought the deadly Ebola virus to Nigeria, information circulated through social media, urging Nigerians to urgently drink water mixed with salt, bath with it to fortify their immune system against Ebola. This piece of misinformation, which went viral as people were asked to share with their loved ones. At the end of it all, about 4 people were reported to have died as a result of too much salt finding their ways into the body through the pores of the skin and jacking up the blood pressure. Also, due to its gateless nature, messages and information that threaten global peace and human existence have freely found their ways on the internet. This is because the internet has been turned to a place where hate messages that incite citizens of the world against one another are propagated. This can be on ethnic, religious basis. Now, what do we do? Because of this situation, and knowing that information shared to a large number of people scattered all over the world through the internet have negative effects on online information consumer, media and information literacy and digital literacy becomes imperative. Digital literacy, which will equip people with the skills to use this digital platform, is being, is being the thing like in part of the country. People are being trained on ICT, but they need media and information literacy to use these digital platforms safely and responsibly. We know it is very difficult to control the media since the emphasis has been on freedom of expression. So it is better to work on information consumers to have these competencies and skills to critically analyze information that get to them. And I made some suggestions on how all of us can join hands together to ensure that media information and digital literacy for everyone is made available globally. Because achieving a universal media information and digital literacy for all requires the collaboration of key stakeholders, policymakers in global media and information communication technology industry, such as government, education institutions, the media, ICT service providers, media and ICT professionals, faith-based organizations, etc. And these are some of my suggestions. In teaching ICT education, media information and digital literacy should be part of it, both at primary, secondary, tertiary levels. Civil organizations have to join. There are some initiatives which have to, be replicated in other parts of the country. I also mentioned that journalists and media practitioners, media organizations should be at the forefront of combating spread of fake news, disinformation, and other things. Journalists, experts, and news sources should also assume the role of influencers on social media by participating in online discussion to help the truth louder and diminish the possibility of false, malicious, and inaccurate information going viral. There are a lot of them, but for want of time, I will stop here. Thank you. These are some of my references.
Thank you, Jude. We'll keep questions for the end. So we invite now Ms. Zhang Yanku from China. She is the Deputy Dean at the Faculty of Journalism and Communication, Communication University of China. The floor is yours, and it would be nice if you could keep to 7 minutes. Questions will be after. I hope that all agree. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I'm from China, Communication University of China. Actually, media literacy movement was actively promoted in China for more than 15 years, and in my university, we ran master degree program of media literacy for 14 years. And almost every year there's international or national media literacy conferences in China, in different cities. And because I attend international conference on media literacy, I find Chinese practice, one practice is quite unique. So I'd like to share this with you, and especially with the challenges of digital communication. So my topic today is media literacy training to Chinese government officials. I'm trying to ask whether media literacy can be promoted to improve the capacity building, and from the capacity building to public administration, what we can do. So, okay, so the background is, we did a lot to promote media literacy, even to our international students. So we have international students from many countries, and they all take media literacy courses, and when they go back home and they promote media literacy in their individual countries. So from their feedback, we find they also think media literacy should be empowered, should be trained, or courses should be given to the government officials or civil servants. And my question is, beyond empowering youth and children or the other social groups, can media literacy empower leadership for public administration purpose? Could media literacy have institutional or organizational function? What has happened in China? This is some figures about Chinese internet development. We have a large population, and we have a large penetration of internet. And yes, we don't carry any cash anymore in China, so we pay everything through WeChat. We enjoy most of the city and public services through mobile phone. So, which means the government has to provide a lot of services through the new digital platform. And that means, the government or the public administration is facing new challenges. Actually, Chinese government in recent years works very hard to promote, e-governance in many, fields by using big data or AI or, whatever you mentioned, like, Alipay, Alibaba, WeChat. And almost every government units, they have to set up their governmental, WeChat or social media account to provide better service. So they have to, answer those, questions raised. And also, for those, weather service industry and the transportation, justice, public security sectors, the social media play a very important role to empower the government to provide better, administration. Actually, our president in recent years talked many times to emphasize the importance to empower the government officials and to encourage them to make better understanding of public concerns, social problems, and how to mobilize, people from social participation and development. So the government also, plays a lot of, play a lot of role in promoting media literacy. And you see there, a lot of training schools, like more than 6,000 training schools. They provide, media literacy training to different, level of government officials. And this one is one of the, party schools from Shanghai. And from the year 2005, more than 25,000 government officials receive media literacy, workshop training, like a 1 or 2 days or course. And the others, and take my university, for example. In my university, we have a Chinese National Media Literacy Training Center for Leadership. From the year 2013 till now, about 254 workshop has been done. More than 30,000 government officials received the training from this center. So that's a quite large number. So my question is, what are those status of Chinese government officials' media literacy? And what are those characteristics? Who need media literacy training eagerly? And what are those challenges? So we did, literature review, case study, participation. But actually, we did observation of 100, workshop, and to see what's going on there. And I'm not going to repeat those details. So we find that, there's regional differences as to, the demand for media literacy, especially from the east and coast side of, provinces. The government really like to send their officials to receive those kind of training. And at the same time, we find, government from the medical background, from the public security, section, from education, environmental protection sections, they really like to promote their government officials' media literacy, media and information literacy. And we have central government, provincial government, and county government. So we found that those major cities, and also provincial, capital cities, the government like to, organize media literacy trainings towards the officials. And those, especially for those spokespersons or those for the communication and information sessions, they badly need, those information. But, the fact is, in recent years, the new media developed very fast, and even I know you have a different, impression of Chinese, media and social media. But we Chinese people really enjoy our, social media, our WeChat, and so that's why, media literacy training was so popular, was largely accepted by the government. What are those challenges? I think, media literacy was also trained, was also organized, in different schools for young people. At the same time, government officials, they do need be empowered or re-empowered, even they are powerful people, okay, in terms of the social media or new media development. So the organizational function and organizational construction of media literacy should be taken seriously by our media literacy researchers. I don't think only the powerless people need to be empowered of media literacy, but also government officials, in order to improve their, public administration efficiency, and also to serve the people better and to provide better digital service. So that's why, in China, that's, media literacy was largely promoted, accepted by the government. Thank you for this.
Thank you for your insights and for presenting your national context. And I would like to invite our next speaker, Mr. Ronan Costello from Ireland. Ronan is a public policy manager of Twitter. The floor is yours.
Hello everyone, my name is Ronan. I am on the public policy team in Twitter. The public policy team is Twitter's representation with governments, with civil societies, with NGOs of all kinds, national NGOs, local NGOs, international NGOs like UNESCO. And as I said, I'm here representing Twitter today. So over the last several months, we've been partnering with UNESCO in preparation, I guess, for Global Media and Information Literacy Week. And I want to talk to you today about why we think this partnership is really valuable, why we'd like to be doing more work with UNESCO and national partners as well in places where we have offices around the world, and as I said, why Twitter think this is important. So Twitter's mission is to serve the public conversation. Twitter is live, it's public, it's open, so it's all about public conversation. So we have an interest, therefore, in improving the health of public conversation on the platform. Over the years, Twitter has been fairly criticized for the amount of negativity on the platform, the amount of toxicity perhaps in some conversations, the amount of abuse that people can get for various reasons, be it their political beliefs or just who they are. And so we want to improve the health of that conversation. And media and information literacy and fostering digital citizenship are global challenges. So if Twitter is a global platform, it makes sense for Twitter to try to partner with an organization that may have similar global reach and global capacity. And in UNESCO, I think we have a really, really good partner to that end. So I think that together, Twitter and UNESCO can create together and amplify resources through Twitter being a global platform, and that improve media information literacy and encourage digital citizenship. And indeed, I asked a question earlier of Carl around elections and public discourse and digital diplomatic or digital democratic participation, because the public policy team is particularly interested in that context. How can we improve the health of conversations and the constructiveness of conversations on Twitter around elections and moments of real national and international importance? So that is definitely going to be a focus of our work going forward. So what are we doing together? It's all well and good saying that we have a partnership together, but what's the content of that partnership? Bearing in mind that this is, I suppose, only the first few months of this, and maybe we can work together in the coming years. So we're going to announce the partnership. We just published a blog on our Twitter corporate site about half an hour ago, I think, that announced the partnership in the context of work we're doing on media literacy generally. We have created a couple of emojis to encourage conversation this week around Media Information and Literacy Week. We're going to distribute, I hope, up to, if not more than $50,000 in Ads for Good grants to a network of non-profit partners that UNESCO works with to amplify their messages around media literacy across the world. And then we're going to try to co-author a guide called, provisionally called Teaching and Learning with Twitter, and I'll talk more about that later. But these are emojis that I hope you're going to see today more and more, and indeed for the rest of the week, and we might look into making them evergreen so that they're online indefinitely. The first is around the concept of Mill City and Mill Cities. So anytime you use that hashtag, that little colorful design will pop up. And then the next one is Think Before Sharing. That's also activated by Global Mill Week, hashtag Global Mill Week. And again, I think that's the one that could become particularly evergreen, right? If we're doing work around elections, be it in the US or the EU next year around parliamentary elections, and we're trying to encourage people to engage in civic, thoughtful discourse, then that particular message, Think Before Sharing, could be applied there as well as this week around Global Mill Week. So we've localized this as well. We don't want this to just be in English. So far, I think we've localized it for 10 or 11 different languages. And my colleagues across the world, working in tandem with their communications colleagues, will push this out from Twitter corporate handles in Singapore, France, Latin America, et cetera, et cetera. And then I said, well, some of these slides are a bit dodgy here, but we'll amplify it from our corporate accounts. And then we'll work on this resource here, Teaching and Learning with Twitter. We had version 1 of this. It was called The Educator's Guide to Twitter, and it was about 10 to 15 pages of pretty high-level advice that could be deployed in a classroom setting or somewhere else like that. And I hope that this iteration of it, because it will be informed by Alton and his team of sectoral and issue experts, that it will become more valuable, and it will be for teachers in the classroom, educators of all kinds, and perhaps even parents. And we wanted to cover global citizenship, digital citizenship, media and information literacy, online safety, because safety is still an issue, so that people know how to interact with others on the platform. There might be some examples of classroom exercises in it, and there may be case studies of how Twitter as a platform has been employed by a school before in a different context. Our current case study is a school in Ireland. They've been using Twitter to connect with other schools and then arrange meetings off of those connections. They've been using it to share the work of their students and connect with other students and their work. So there's a way to sort of integrate these platforms into the classroom, and we hope that this will be a useful resource. It will also be localized into, again, 10 to 15 different languages, distributed by our team globally, and hopefully as well distributed by UNESCO too. Now, I want to say as well, actually, that we're very open to either participating in or hosting events that focus on media and information literacy, digital citizenship, participation in elections and things of that nature. Twitter's offices, we don't have nearly as many offices as some of our sister companies like Google and Facebook. We have a much smaller global footprint from a staffing perspective, but we have offices in cities that you consider probably leading mill cities, you know, be it Dublin, London, Paris, San Francisco, Singapore, elsewhere. So if there are opportunities to get involved in events around this topic, we're open to it and to collaborate with you as hopefully as transparently as we've been collaborating with UNESCO so far. Have I hit about 7 minutes?
Yes, but we can have 1 minute for final word.
Well, I was going to go through this stuff. Obviously, I don't have time for this. So what I want to say is that we are asking for more and more public feedback on policy development. In September, so just last month, we announced that we're going to revise our hateful conduct policy to include a dehumanizing language aspect, that you will not be able to abuse others with dehumanizing language on Twitter anymore. But before that policy is finalized, we've opened it up for public feedback for the first time. So there was a public feedback form. Anyone could submit a comment. Our data team will collect all those comments and they will feed it into the policy development process. And hopefully this is something we will do increasingly in the future, along with organizations like this and our Trust and Safety Council. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Ronan. Many thanks to Twitter for sharing meal education ideas and for promoting these ideas in the world. And we continue presentations on different stakeholders and industries around meal. And I would like to invite Ms. Irene Andriopoulou from Greece, who is a media literacy expert at the National Center of Audiovisual Media and Communication.
Thank you. I would like also to thank the organizers, and we're actually pretty enthusiastic with the theme of this feature conference this year, the MIL cities, because actually we believe that it signifies the apparent need for a future-proof infrastructure on media and information literacy. So some challenging questions to begin with. It's like, what if policymakers join their forces together and enable a powerful and influential MIL policy? Is it open? Yes? Oh, okay, thank you. What if the media industry supported the creative language of young people and students were engaged in all-inclusive relationship with the media and educators participated in professional development programs? Then we would be living in the MIL cities. So does this city actually exist? Well, yes and no. Depends on where your eye rolls on the global map. The previous speaker mentioned some cities all over the world. So the key premise to begin with is a pluralistic media literacy, media and information literacy dynamics for all, that in the form of a regulatory framework, it needs the presence of an indicator, cultural and media and information literacy indicators that will measure, evaluate, and assess all relevant media mechanisms. The main challenge to begin with in terms of learn by doing is how do we evaluate creativity and original thought. It's the third action of the third strand of media literacy, creativity. Also, how do we distinguish among an experimental audiovisual work and a polysemantic expression through the media? How can you tell the difference? Well, in terms of teaching and practicing media and information literacy, according to early childhood researchers, it meets the 4 learning impulses of the child. That is to inquire, to communicate, to construct, and to express, engage with the others. So the MIL citizen is the one who is able to reflect on the inner self and on society through wise media choices and healthy digital habits. So every citizen today, we all know that is a creator, a communicator, and a commentator of information. And the issue of empowerment falls primarily upon structured mechanisms that shall be set, regulated by the state. Sometimes when we mention regulation, it is often approached as controlling and restricting. Sometimes it evokes distrust to the public at large. However, the example of the recently voted reform of the EU AVMSD directive by the European Commission contains many issues that have to do with kids' content, quality kids' content, protection, and most importantly, media literacy is also back to the agenda. under the relevant articles. So it is set as a responsibility for media service providers and all citizens at large. So as I said, we need media and information literacy indicators to evaluate all actions taken. On the long run, they help citizens to question the function of media and ISPs, to evaluate the quality of their content, of media messages, and to become better social activists and in their quest for better content. So on this premise, indicators may have a tremendous impact on the pluralistic nature of public information and communication policies. However, there are many particularities in the implementation procedures, many risk-related issues. Also, the multidimensional nature of media and information literacy makes it more complex. And also a number of experts is required from a multidisciplinary perspective. So heading towards a global paradigm, we needed first to make a division among definitional indicators that have to do with the conceptual framework of MIL, what is involved, what are the skills, competencies, the social and communication skills involved. And among the practical indicators, which is the actual public policies that need to be taken and have to do with the media content regulation, lifelong learning procedures, etc. So ideally, a media and information literacy indicators map in the relevant cognitive fields would look like that. It will have regulation on media and information literacy, sustainable and concrete regulation, either from the media policies perspective or in typical education and lifelong learning. As David Buckingham recently wrote in his blog, we need to start imagining how things could be different, better, turning media into change makers. And regulation can achieve this in the most proactive way. So we need to have a national entity on media and information literacy, every country or region, that will be assigned to draw the national public policy on the relevant field. In Greece, we're in the great position to announce that after years of long-standing gap in the field, we have the creation of ECOME, say the National Center of Audiovisual Media and Communication, has emerged the past 2 years, which is the focal point for reference on audiovisual and media and information literacy. You may have seen some brochures I have left outside. Okay. And we aspire to become the media literacy creative hub in Greece and globally. Another point is that we need to have independent media authorities with advanced tasks on MIL. We need to have actions on co- and self-regulation in accordance with the media industry and the social media players. We need to have presence in the typical education, in educators' lifelong learning actions and resources and workshops, advanced and up-to-date research, either by the EU community or the academia. We need to have social activism because sometimes this civic sector, strong civic sector, may initiate actions, and it's easier to develop some pressure towards more concrete and state-driven actions. We need to have a clear target group. Who do we address every time through our actions? Is it seniors, students, parents, etc.? We need to have a strong civic society and open educational resources and open society mechanisms. So the challenges for enforcement is the cost of implementation, that's the last one. It's the systematic monitoring of statistical data on a regular basis. The digital gap, sometimes the indicators may overlap with existing ones, like DAISY or PISA indicators. The constant reforms on education, media, audiovisual, they play an important role. But the greatest challenge of all is the realization that pursuing MIL in the form of indicators not only secures a prominent place of the region country in the global sphere, but is a fundamental social convention as it was referenced today, earlier this morning, towards sustainable and knowledge democratic societies where human capital is on top. Thank you very much. A more detailed approach on the indicators you may find in the upcoming International Encyclopedia on Media Literacy, edited by Renee Hopes and Paul Mihailidis. It will come up in spring 2019. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eileen.
That was quick.
And I would like to invite one more speaker today, Ms. Gita Berada from Morocco. She's Senior Executive at the Department of Media Studies, High Authority of Audiovisual Communication. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here in such a beautiful city to talk about MIL. My PowerPoint is in French. I'm very sorry of that, but I will speak in English, or at least try to. I represent the High Authority of Audiovisual Communication in Morocco. We regulate audiovisual press in Morocco. First, I will talk just some few words about the involvement of the High Authority of Audiovisual Communication, the ACA, in MIL. And after that, I will try to analyze the connections between smart cities and MIL cities. And finally, I will focus on content industries and on in what extent they can be change makers within MIL cities. So HACA was created in 2002. To ease and accompany the liberalization of audiovisual communication sector, and so here are just some milestones. Our missions are very clear. I will just cite the freedom of expression, for example, and the right to information. But since 2 years, in 2016, a new law has come to. So now HACA has to promote MIL. We are compelled to do that. Media information literacy is part of our five-year strategy. And last year, a group was created to work on MIL. I will skip some slides. I just want to say that last year, HACA has organized in partnership with the UNESCO a 2 days conference. It was entitled Child Protection and Media Information Literacy. It was an international event. More than 15 countries have participated to it, as well as UNESCO experts and some famous MIL experts like Professor Divina Fromex. And actually, it was the first time that the MIL topic was analyzed in an African scale. So now, what are the links between smart cities and MIL cities? First of all, one of the objectives of media information literacy is to create conditions to exercise citizenship in a smart and constructive way. And but before speaking about smart cities, we have to evoke the demographic urban challenge. We know that every year a city of 1 million inhabitants has to be created to absorb the demographic urban explosion. And a possible response to this challenge is the smart cities. For example, in Casablanca, which has the five rank about the density, we have in Casablanca a 5-year strategy to make it a smart city. Alors, and here I just will cite Mr. Jordi Herreu, who was a previous mayor of Barcelona. He said that he said during the Smart City Expo of Casablanca in April, the ingredients which make a smart city, a successful smart city, are talents, technology, and tolerance. So a smart city is a mix of artificial and human intelligence. That's why a smart city has to be a mild city, so a city which allows a smart exercise of citizenship. And if we look closer to the link between smart and mild cities, we observe that they have a lot of common. First of all, they have an input in common, which is the synergies deployed between actors who came from different backgrounds. Second common point, they both need the same tool, which is the digital revolution. And both of smart cities and mild cities have the same goal, which is to transform something which is something like urbanization or sur-information in something you control and you plan. And actually, it's not only the economy which is impacted by digital transformation. It's the whole society, and I've chosen to focus on the impact of content industry. So because by content industries, I mean audiovisual, internet, multimedia, and the gaming sector as well. So they contribute to build the new economic models. But there are also a lot of stakes, like public health, like the evolution of the legal frameworks, the regulation of the contents, the economic regulation of these actors, because we have today giant digital actors like the GAFA, and for example, if I take the example of Google. Google is about to transform the whole society, and not only the economic field. Google has invested billions of dollars in some sophisticated industries like regenerative medicine and biotechnology. And I will conclude with a phrase of Larry Page, the co-founder of Google. He said 4 years ago, Google wants to euthanize debt. So I want to finish with this philosophical note, because it's the whole society, the whole world which will be different. Thank you.
Thank you, Gita. And now we have a couple of minutes for questions and answers. Maybe there are questions from the audience. I would ask you to take mic. Please introduce yourself and your question, as well as the person whom you are addressing it. Thank you.
It's a quick question for Mr. Costello. And I'd like to know the process to determine how did you define these two new emojis? Because if it is about think of before sharing, and now we know that the use of Twitter is not really mass usage. It's not between normal people, it's much more between journalists and media officials and so on. So how do you see this? Thank you.
Yeah, I think, so Twitter has about 335 million monthly active users. A lot of those are journalists, people who are involved in politics, people who are involved in entertainment, but they don't make up the bulk of those 335 million. They couldn't almost. So the vast majority of users are probably folks who just enjoy Twitter for what it is. They may also be on other platforms like Instagram and Facebook. I think when you're talking about an election context in particular, misinformation, disinformation, false rumors about candidates, or false information being shared about how you can vote, like someone saying to you, oh, you don't need to leave your house, you can vote on Twitter. It's important for us to get the message out to folks that they should think before they share those pieces of information in their network, because if they share it in their network, then someone else can share it again and again and again, and then you have this sort of mushroom effect out the whole thing. So there's that element to it, and I think it's an evergreen message, as I mentioned previously. And I think just from chatting with Alton and the folks in UNESCO, we thought it was a nice, catchy hashtag as well. Think before sharing. Think before clicking, or think before you click would also work too. And we wanted there to be a thematic message that would activate this emoji, as well as the straight up hashtag Global Mill Week. So the two complement each other.
More questions? Yes.
Hello. I have a question for the same presenter, Twitter official. Sir, you highlighted in your presentation that health of conversation is your sole main agenda. So can you elaborate upon what are your standards to improve the health of conversation? I am failed to understand how the conversation health is being improved by you. What are the standards?
So that's a good question, and it's something I didn't touch on much in the presentation. So in March of this year, considering most people in this room are academics or from a university or a background, in March of this year we opened a request for proposal. It was the first time that Twitter had done that, opened a request for proposal, and the aim of the request for proposal was to ask universities and think tanks to submit ways that we could tangibly and methodically measure the improvement of the health of conversation on Twitter. How do you prove with numbers that the discourse on Twitter is more positive now than it was last year? Lots of people try to measure sentiment and things like that, and that I still think the data around that can be ropey. So this was an open question, and in July the winners of that process were announced. So we're working with the University of Oxford, the Internet Institute of the University of Oxford, and the University of Leiden. So two European universities won against a lot of universities from Asia Pacific and indeed American, Canada and Latin America. So it's European research is going to drive this work now in measuring the health or the improvement of health in public conversation, and I would hope that they'd have results on this at some point next year. The quid pro quo with Twitter was, if you win this proposal, you have privileged access to Twitter's API, you get grant funding, and you have access to our offices if you need to come in and meet people and have regular conversations and meetings with them.
This is not a mental game. This is a subject to a consciousness. And question of consciousness cannot be answered through machine. We need to reinvent our methods to improve the health of conversation. This is my point of view. I'm not trying to impose my point of view on you. This is my perception.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have more questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm here representing the Africa Youth Movement, and my question is to Madame Rita Barada. I think I would really like to ask about Haga's strategy in including youth in the MIL framework in the context of Morocco, and if you could please elaborate more on that?
Thank you for your question. Actually, Haka has really done a lot of activism in order to change the law, and the new law, the expected law, came 2 years ago, and now we have to promote MIL. So our strategy to do that is first of all communicate about that, sensibilize the audiovisual operators in Morocco, Moroccan television and Moroccan radio. So we do some training sessions with them. We also plan to elaborate some guidelines, a booklet to explain them the stakes and how to implement MIL in their daily practice. So it's about communication, training, and try to raise the awareness of MIL among our press, because it's something it's not that common in Morocco. We're trying to improve that by international events too. I mentioned the event of last year, and there is also an echo in the press. So that's basically our strategy.
Or is it just for professionals and experts?
Alors, MIL is something brand new in Morocco. So we're trying to tackle it step by step. So the first step is to reach the professionals, as you mentioned. The second step and the future steps will be indeed to tackle other targets. But for the moment, we aim to tackle professional targets. Thank you.
Thank you. We have last question, unfortunately, and we finish before lunch, but I'm sure that you will have time to speak to speakers in person. Thank you.
Was it the last question? Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to thank all the speakers, actually. I had one question for Mr. Abuju. You were mentioning the issue of translating, I don't remember the term you used, the internet model from the global south to the global north, if I may use those terms. And myself, I'm a PhD student working on digital inclusion in the European context, but I'm aspiring to, transmit this knowledge in a more development context. My question, therefore, was to get your opinion about what are the main challenges when transmitting these internet models and how to overcome them.
If I got you, well, you are talking about you were talking about translation of internet.
I don't know the term you used, but you mentioned the idea it wasn't easy to just use the European model and transpose it in the African model, if I understood correctly.
You know, some countries are more advanced technologically than the others. For instance, in Africa, some of the things you already have in place here are still evolving. So, but with the help of internet, we share knowledge and ideas. People in Africa and wherever, they can get to see what is happening here, and they can now replicate it in their own home country. But you know that there's a digital divide. Some of these technologies we are talking about in the media and the information landscape are manufactured by these technologically advanced countries, and they also offer the training. So for people in the third world country, they need to, be in close contact with the technologically advanced countries to be able to know how to use this digital technology, and also know how to access information and ideas, and also be an equal receiver and equal share of the information. Whatever they have, they can equally share with the people in the West through the internet. That was the point I was trying to make. We are still trying to pick up from them. But internet will help us to learn some of these things, even in the media and information literacy that we're talking about. It's still a new concept in some part of Africa. But with awareness and education and conferences like this, people will get to know what is happening, and we'll begin to teach our own people that some of the things you see on the internet, some of the information you receive, some things you see on the media, like news, not all of them are rare. That you need to question maybe the credibility of the sources. You need to look in depth to be able to decipher which of these information or news is trying to manipulate you or deceive you or trying to incite you against one another. This is actually what I'm trying to talk about. And that was why in my conclusion I talked about collaboration between all the relevant policymakers and their professionals. Thank you.
And I would like to thank again our speakers, including keynote of today. I would like to thank the audience for attending this session. We close it, but we continue at the lunch. Lunch is served on the 4th floor. Please turn to left, take stairs until 4th floor.